Hello and welcome to Diecast Diaries. I'm Dan. Now, after doing various videos on military vehicles, warships, fire engines, etc., I thought it was time to have a look at some aircraft. I've been interested in planes for almost as long as vehicles, but growing up in the 80s, the main toy aircraft available were the Matchbox Skybusters range, of which I've got an example here. Now, I am a fan of the Skybusters range, but I would have to admit that they are quite small, detail is pretty basic, quite a few of them are in unrealistic looking markings, and they all tended to have rather oversized fixed undercarriage. Understandable given their size, but still. Dinky did a nice range of aircraft, but after their demise in 1980, these were no longer available, and there really wasn't much else around. But this all changed in 1987 when Ertl introduced their Force One range. So these were larger sized military aircraft, mainly fighter planes, and they all featured retractable undercarriage and removable weapons. There were, I think, 21 different aircraft types that Ertl released, including 4 helicopters, and most of the planes had at least one variant, plus there were also 3 military vehicles. Now, I don't have the full range, but even so, I do still have 34 models to look at. So what I'm going to do, as that would end up being quite a long video, similar to my Matchbox Battle Kings one, is I'm going to split this one into 2 parts. But rather than looking at the models in the order in which they were released by Ertl, I'm going to be looking at the individual aircraft types one at a time to show the different variants. So, without further ado, we have the F-16 Fighting Falcon. Now, this has long been one of my all-time favourite planes, so it's probably no surprise that this was the very first Force One model that I got. It's worth pointing out here that some of the models that we'll be showing are ones I've genuinely had since the late 80s and early 90s. As I say, this being one of them. And straight away you can see they're at least double the size of the Skybusters range. The whole aircraft, wings, fuselage, tail fin is all metal. The only even the undercarriage is metal. The only plastic bits being the cockpit canopy, obviously, and the pilot figure, the jet pipe at the back, and the plastic missiles underneath. The markings, a lot better than Skybusters, but I do think some of these earlier releases, although the US Air Force markings are obviously kind of genuine, the actual squadron markings that Ertl chose for, as I say, a couple of the earlier releases, I think are made up. I've not found any that kind of match this. But despite that, you know, they look pretty plausible, certainly look better than sort of some of the garish colours that Skybusters came out with. So as I mentioned, they've all got retractable undercarriage, so these just kind of retract up like so. Now, as we said, although the undercarriage does retract, some of them work better than others. And you can see even on the F-16, the rear wheels in particular are still sort of quite exposed. I mean, look, it's understandable, as I say, you know, even though these are kind of twice the size of Skybusters, they're still not massive. And obviously to have it sort of properly sort of going in the fuselage, it'd end up being ridiculously complicated. So, but yeah, still, as I say, light years ahead of Skybusters. So I can't remember what shop I first saw these in, but I was an instant fan. It ended up being one of my absolute favourite toy ranges throughout the rest of the 80s and into the 90s. So you can see underneath, these are all the plastic weapons. Now, one nice feature with these is that each individual aircraft type got its own set of ordnance. So all of the F-16s had this same loadout, but the good thing is, as I say, all of the other aircraft had their own range of weapons, which is nice. So with the F-16 here, you've got wingtip sidewinders, you've got a couple of Sparrow air-to-air missiles, a couple of Paveway laser-guided bombs, a couple of fuel tanks, and then what I'm guessing is possibly just a normal bomb or another smaller fuel tank on the centre line. And these were supplied on a plastic sprue, and you just kind of like clipped them off, and they just literally just clip on, and they sort of kind of come off quite easily, kind of just like that. I'll just leave that there. They're a little bit fiddly to kind of put on. So it's fair to say that during play, it was quite easy for these to come off and go missing. And as you can see with one of the wingtip ones, it has suffered over the years. I mean, come on, this particular one is getting on for being 40 years old, so it's not done bad. But yeah, some of the wingtip ones, you can see those missiles are noticeably thinner than some of the other ones, so they did tend to suffer a little bit. And the other thing, although this one thankfully hasn't suffered from it, is that the undercarriage could end up becoming quite loose. I know with some of mine, I ended up having to put a bit of blue tack inside the wheel well just to kind of hold the wheels in place when I wanted to have it in flight. But yes, that's the first release of the F-16. Now, There was actually another F-16 released around about the same time, which had exactly the same markings, but instead of this one being grey, the other one was kind of overall silver. It didn't look quite as realistic. Also, the early releases, such as this one, the tyres, although they are, as I say, all the undercarriage is metal, the tyres were done in this silver colour. Later releases would feature black plastic tyres, which obviously look quite a bit better. So that's the first release of the F-16. So I'll just pop this over there. And then in 1991, Ertl brought out this one in a really eye-catching Thunderbirds scheme. So the Thunderbirds, it's the US Air Force equivalent of the Red Arrows. All of the aircraft, even this one, was supplied with a full set of missiles and bombs. So exactly the same bombs, as I say, as the first release. I just decided, for the purpose of this video, I thought I'd only put the sidewinds on it. Of course, it's quite unrealistic for a Thunderbird plane to have any ordnance at all, but they look a bit odd without anything on the end of the wing, so I decided to put the sidewinders on. But yeah, really nice scheme. The other thing is, I should have mentioned with the first one, the main markings tended to be tampoed. Then you got a sheet of stickers with them to put the smaller markings on, such as the little stars and bars or the squadron markings, things like that. So you did get, like I say, a little set of stickers with each one. And you can see on this one, it's got the later wheels, which do look much better. But again, obviously undercarriage kind of goes up like that. And you can see on this one how much the rear undercarriage is exposed, but really it's not that bad. So we'll just pull this one out. So this is one of my more recent acquisitions. Back when I was sort of buying these when I was little, sort of like late 80s, early 90s, the ones that were in kind of air show schemes, things like that, didn't appeal to me as much. I preferred the ones that were in like proper military schemes. So that's why I never picked this one up when I was little, even though, you know, you'd think it'd probably be one of the more eye-catching ones of the range. But yes, that's a more recent acquisition. So I'll just pop that there. And then the last version of the F-16 that I've got is this one. So this one came out in 1994, and it's actually in New York Air National Guard markings. It says the boys from Syracuse on the bottom there. 174th Tactical Fighter Wing. So whereas I think the very first release, the markings are a little bit kind of made up, later releases were in genuine unit markings, genuine US Air Force or whatever organisation it might have been, genuine markings. And this one's also got the markings on the spine that's where the refueling probe needs to go for air-to-air refueling. So there was another F-16, I think also released about the same time, very similar to this one in this kind of two-tone grey scheme. But that one had SW on the tail, showing that it's from Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. So again, another one in genuine markings. Unfortunately, that's one, a bit like the original silver one, I've not been able to pick up yet. So, as I say, there are still some out there I've not managed to get. So the F-16 was one of only 2 models that Ertl did that actually had 5 variants, the other one of which I will come to shortly. So I'll just pop that there. And then we move on to the next one, which is the F-15 Eagle. So this is another model that dates from 1987, although with this one, they have at least done the full colour star and bar on the wing. So as I mentioned, the star and bar, the USAF on the wing there, would all have been tampoed. The rest of the markings, even including the large US Air Force marking here, all stickers. You got the stripe under the cockpit. This is another one I think is in kind of generic markings. It's not kind of any sort of specific squadron or anything like that. But again, you can see it's got a completely different loadout. So you've got a couple of Sparrows, what look like Phoenix air-to-air missiles, these sort of larger ones here. And then 3, I'm not sure whether they're supposed to be bombs or fuel tanks or something. I'm not really sure what they are. But again, as I say, it's a unique loadout for the F-15. This one looks a little bit better in that when the wheel's up, because it's got that piece at the back, it does at least look like it's covered up when it's retracted. And these ones do at least partially go into the wheel well. Although they do still stick out a little bit, but that's just to make it easy for you to get them out again. So I'll just pull them out. This is another one, incidentally, that I've had since the late 80s. I think I got it one Christmas. So that's the first release of the F-15. And then in 1994, they brought out this one Now this is very much in genuine markings, so it represents one that flew during the Gulf War, 1991, so it's actually called Gulf Spirit, with 3 Iraqi kill markings under the cockpit. The EG stands for Eaglin Air Force Base, so it's 33rd Tactical Fighter Wing. You can see it's got the Tactical Air Command badge on the tail fin there. Really smart markings, this. And another feature of the later ones is that they tended to tone down the overall colour scheme a little bit, so it's far more of a matte finish on this one, which does look a lot better. Surprisingly, given how widely the Eagle's used, they did only do 2 variants of it. So this was the second one. So yeah, there weren't any others after this one. But yeah, this one really looks good compared to the original release. So that's the second release of the F-15. And then we move on to the F-14 Tomcat. Now, this was an aircraft that would have been very much in the public consciousness after sort of like the mid-80s with the release of Top Gun. Now, unfortunately, with Ertl releasing these the year after Top Gun came out, they never actually were able to release one that could have like tied in with the film. Ertl had done a number of mainly sort of toy cars that tied in with sort of films and TV series, so it would have been nice for them to sort of tie one in with Top Gun. But yeah, I suppose these coming out a year later, it was a bit too late, really. Now, this one does seem to be one of the first ones that looks to be in genuine markings. So it's marked up as an aircraft from the USS Enterprise. Again, it's got its own unique weapons loadout. So it's got a couple of Sparrows and then 4 Phoenix air-to-air missiles. Now the Phoenix, it was a long-range air-to-air missile. It was a real feature of the Tomcat. It was like a missile that it was mainly kind of equipped with. And one nice feature with this one is that it does have working swing wings. So you can sort of fold them out like that, and then they just nicely fold back in. And then again, the undercarriage isn't too bad on this one. They kind of retracted nicely. Again, they do stick out a little bit, but as I say, that's just to make it easy for you to open them up again. So I'll just get the undercarriage open, and there. Now, this was another one that was released in 1987 alongside the Silver F-16 and the Silver F-15, and the 3 of these were also available in a set of 3, which was quite a nice set. I'll just pop that over there. Now, the Tomcat, similar to the F-15, it's another one where they only did a couple of variants of it, and it's kind of surprising that for the second one, they've kind of chosen this kind of rather dull scheme, really. So obviously it is another genuine one, but the Tomcat was in quite a few eye-catching squadron markings. You've got the Jolly Rogers and things like that had like really quite eye-catching tail fin markings. So it's kind of surprising that Ertl went for this one. You can see it's another one that they've kind of, although it's still quite a gloss finish, it's a much more toned down scheme than like the silver finish. And this, of course, being a later one, has got the sort of plastic tyres, a little much better. The other thing that they tended to do was, with some of the later ones, is they've actually moulded the missiles in grey rather than white. That kind of looks more realistic as well. But yeah, so that's the second release of the Tomcat. And again, of course, the wings fold out nicely. So I'll start another over that one, put that one there. Then we move on to one of my absolute favourites from the range. It's the A-10 Thunderbolt 2. Far better known as the Warthog, because it's not exactly a looker, or also known as the Tank Buster. So this was another one that came out in 1987, but obviously a silver finish would have looked completely unrealistic for this. All of the ones kind of that served during the 80s were in this kind of like, but usually it was like a sort of two-tone green and grey scheme. Ertl have gone for this kind of nice looking green and brown scheme. This is another one that, again, I think is in made-up markings. I've never seen a picture of an A-10 that's got this kind of falcon marking on the nose. Now, it's worth pointing out with this one, as it's one of my favourites, a while ago I did have the opportunity to pick one up off eBay that was mint in its box. So this gives us a chance to have a look at what the boxes look like. So this was what the original boxes from the 80s looked like. So it's thick cardboard and like a plastic bubble that was sandwiched in between. Quite difficult to open, but what it does mean is that the actual aircraft itself is quite well protected. But it does give you kind of a good chance to have a look at the whole model before you decided to buy it. So you can see there you've got the sheet of stickers that you could apply. That's the sprue with obviously all the weapons on. He had a bit of information about the specific aircraft. And you can see on there, these are the sort of tampoed markings here. So you've got the star and bar and the US Air Force. And then obviously just gave a few details, obviously authentically detailed, die-cast metal construction, authentic US Air Force decals, retractable landing gear, removable ordnance payload. But you can see the Force One logo is this kind of like stylized eagle head. And I do think that's clearly what that is based on. So yeah, as I say, I do think these are kind of just made up markings again. But the A10 in this green scheme it is one of my absolute favourites from the range. Again, unique loadout. So it's got 6 Maverick air-to-ground missiles. The ones in the middle, I'm not sure what they are. They just look kind of like generic kind of iron bombs. Now, what's noticeable here is that one of them has broken. As I mentioned with the first F-16, the missiles could be quite brittle sometimes, and this is one that did get broken when it was little. This is another one I've had for years. It has got a little bit of playwear to it. So yeah, unfortunately, one of the bombs did get broken. Now, I wrote off to Ertl sometime not long after it got broken. Ertl had a UK address. I wrote off to them asking was there any chance they could send me a new set of missiles for my A10. They didn't send me a new set of missiles. They actually sent me this, which was amazing. I was kind of blown away when this arrived in the post. So this is the second version of the A10. This was released in 1992 in obviously a desert scheme. And it features the shark mouth markings that a lot of A10s were actually seen with. So again, it's in actual markings. Of course, if I'm being picky, it didn't actually solve the problem of the missing bomb or broken bomb. But you know, I can't complain when they decided to send me that sort of totally free of charge. So I was really, really pleased with that. I should just show you the undercarriage on this one. So the front wheel folds up nicely, and again, it's got that at the back, so it looks quite covered up. Now with the main undercarriage or the rear undercarriage, the fact that they protrude slightly from the nacelles on the wings is actually sort of quite realistic. The real A10 has wheels that protrude slightly just to facilitate it if it does need to come in for like a wheels up landing. This one, obviously all of the Force One range kind of suffer if you're getting them unboxed. They're naturally or kind of nearly always going to be missing the missiles because I say they come off quite easily. The A10, the engine pods are plastic. That's another bit that can quite easily go missing. But the rest of it's all metal again. There was actually a third version of the A10, but that seems to have only been released in the States. It was in like a really nice grey scheme. And it was released in a sort of packaging that it wasn't kind of like the normal Force One packaging. It was in like a bit of a sub-series that Ertl did called American Body Shop. Body Shop as in like a sort of garage, that kind of thing. It's one I've never seen on eBay. I've seen pictures of it. There are a couple of Force One websites out there, so it's shown up on there. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not one I've ever managed to pick up. It's one of the ones that's kind of top of my wants list, really. But yeah. So ordinarily, there were just like the 2 A10s. So that's the desert one. And then we move on to the F-18 Hornet. Now this represents one released in 1994. I think there were some early releases. There are at least a couple of other releases of this one. This is like, I think, the last release of it. Bizarrely, I actually picked this up from a model shop in Cologne when I was over there on the German exchange with school. And that was in 1994, so it was, obviously that makes sense that that's obviously the year it was released in. So again, unique weapons load. Now this is another aircraft that features wingtip sidewinders, but it's a completely different moulding, quite a thicker moulding. I have to say kind of less realistic looking moulding than the ones on the F-16. It's then got twin sidewinders under the wings, and then a couple of Sparrow air-to-air missiles. This one's in US Marine Corps markings. The other ones that they did, there's one that's in kind of quite an unusual pale blue scheme. There's one that's in a really pale grey scheme, looks almost white. And then the one that I'm desperately trying to find is the one in the US Navy Blue Angels colour scheme. It's another one, like I kind of mentioned when I talked about the Thunderbirds F-16. Airshow type colour schemes never really bothered me when I was little. Of course, now I really wish I'd got one, as it seems to be one of the most difficult ones to find. So yeah, that's another one that's kind of, along with the grey A10, sort of towards the top of my wants list. So that's the F-18 Hornet. Unfortunately, as I say, I've only got the one of those. And then we have the US Marine Corps Harrier, the AV-8B. This was a really nice one. Another one of my favourites that Ertl brought out. And again, I think this one is in kind of genuine markings. So this one dates from 1989, so it is a couple of years after the initial releases. So with this one, as well as the normal undercarriage retracting, you've also got the wingtip stabilisers. Obviously, these are done in plastic, and they just kind of fold up as well. And with this one again, you've got a weapons load of a couple of sidewinders, 3 bombs, and a cannon pod, which is quite interesting. But it is something that these were armed with. There you go. That kind of shows what kind of I mentioned earlier on about over time. This is another one I've had for years. Over time, the undercarriage can come a bit loose and just drop down. And I think, yeah, you can see there is a bit of blue tack in there. That's probably been in there for years since I genuinely did play with this. So, yeah, so that's the first release of the US Marine Corps Harrier. I'll just pop the wheels down again so I can put it down. I think there's, blue tack in the rear for the rear wheel as well. Here we go. And then in 1993, they brought out another AV8B, this one being in the then current sort of two-tone grey scheme. This is another one that's in a much more matte finish, and it's completely matte finish to be fair, compared to some of the early ones. Unfortunately with this is one I've picked up kind of fairly recently off eBay, unboxed, but luckily with all but one of its missiles. So as it's not one of the most common ones, it was worth getting. The fact it's only missing the one, the rest of it's in pretty good condition. So that's another US Marine Corps AV8B Harrier. I'll put that here. And then at the same time as the first US Marine Corps one was released, they actually released the first non-US aircraft, which was the Sea Harrier. So this is another one that came out in 1989. Now, technically, this is something that not just Ertl are guilty of. It's exactly the same mould that the AV8B used for the AV8B, whereas the Sea Harrier, although it's obviously based on the same aircraft, it is a different airframe. There are like a few sort of differences, but it's something you kind of can forgive Ertl for. As I say, they certainly weren't the only company guilty of using moulds for multiple variants. But it's done in a nice sort of Royal Navy scheme. I'm pretty sure it is a genuine scheme. You've got obviously the camouflage style roundels on the wings and the fuselage. I'm not sure if that's the correct placement for the underwing ones though. This is one I've picked up second hand, and it obviously already had the stickers applied. But you can see that's got the full weapons load out. Now, although, as I say, I don't have the full range, even when I was sort of collecting them when I was sort of like in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, I tended to have a pretty good idea of what models were out there. So it was quite a surprise when, fairly recently, doing a bit of a search on eBay, I came across this one. So it's another version of the Sea Harrier, but in kind of the sort of uncamouflaged scheme. So you've got the completely white underneath, and you've got the roundels that have the white in sort of the uncamouflaged version, and then you've got the full colour sort of squadron marking on the tail. So, I mean, these were obviously genuine markings that Royal Navy Sea Harriers were in. I've seen pictures of when the task force was sailing to the Falklands in 1982. These being hastily camouflaged, so the white bits on the roundels being hastily painted over. But yeah, first came across one of these on eBay, and I think at first I thought it must have been like a repaint that somebody had done. But I had a quick look on Google and found a couple of other pictures of these, and then I think I found reference to one of these on a website about Force One. So it was quite clearly it was one that released by them, and then luckily I was able to pick one up sort of quite cheaply. So yeah, quite unusual that they did kind of such a similar scheme with the Sea Harrier, just kind of like the uncamouflaged version. That's a nice one. I do think that's one of the harder ones to get, but that's a nice one. Let's pop that there. And then the Harrier, along with the F-16, it's the other one that has 5 different variants. And this is another one. This is the RAF. This is a Harrier GR7. As I say, I thought when I was collecting these when I was little that I had a pretty good idea of all the ones that have been released. But it was about 10 years ago, I came across a seller on eBay who'd got a load of unboxed but mint Ertl Force One planes, and he'd got this, and it was the first time I'd seen the RAF Harrier. Unfortunately, on that occasion, I didn't win that particular Harrier, but obviously I've subsequently managed to pick one up. So this one, I've not actually been able to find a release date for it, but judging by the fact it's got the kind of the matte finish, it's got the black tyres, I'm pretty sure this will have been kind of 93, 94 sort of time. And again, it's got like an individual aircraft number and sort of squadron markings. Yes, that's a really nice one. So, as I say, along with the F-16, the Harrier is the other one that's got 5 variants. Most of them did only tend to have a couple. That's all 5 of the Harriers. Then the last 2 I'm going to show in this video are the F-117 stealth fighter, first of all. So this is one that came out in 1990. Quite a sort of simple casting. This is the first one that doesn't have any kind of proper cockpit. It's all just painted black. It was obviously far simpler for Ertl to do that. Of course, they don't have like a proper sort of canopy like most of the other aircraft do. And it's just in like an overall black scheme. No ordnance carried underneath because the real one has an internal weapons bay that only opens when they're actually dropping the bombs. Just put the wheels up. This one's actually sort of quite a nice one, I must admit, even though it is sort of like fairly simple. This is an aircraft that would have been quite unknown, really, in 1990. It's quite amazing to learn, really, that this aircraft first flew in 1981. It's actually as old as that. I think it was first released to the public sometime in the late 80s. Came to sort of public prominence in the Gulf War in 1991, but that wasn't actually its first combat use. It was actually first used in the 1989 invasion of Panama. I don't think it was in any great numbers. So really it was, as I say, the Gulf War where it really came to prominence. Actual aircraft isn't in service anymore. It was retired in 2008, although I believe some of them are still used for training, things like that, but it's not in kind of frontline service anymore. So that's the F-117, known as the Nighthawk, but I'm never really sure how much of an official name that is. Unsurprisingly, this is one of a handful of planes in the range that only has the one variant. There aren't really a lot of other versions of this that you can do, to be honest. They were all kind of in this kind of black. None of them had like really sort of eye-catching nose art or anything. They tended to put the nose art on the inside of the weapons bays. So yeah, it's not surprising, as I say, that they just did the one version. But that's the F-117. And then the last one is quite an odd one, really. So it's the F-19 stealth fighter. Now this is an aircraft that technically never actually existed. There was an aircraft that during the 80s there were an awful lot of rumours about, and I think it's what culminated in the F-117 that we just looked at. But for an aircraft that was supposedly quite secret, there do seem to be an awful lot of models and things like that of this about. So as well as Ertl doing a diecast version, there were at least a couple of other diecast versions. There was at least one model kit of this type plane, all looking basically similar with these sort of canards at the front and the kind of unusual wing shape and the sort of unusually canted in tail fins. There was even a flight simulator release for like PCs that was called F-19. So yeah, it's quite an unusual plane for Ertl to do. Now I was of the opinion that at least one of these must have been made like as a prototype and flown, but I don't think that's the case. There are various models of them that were made for like testing purposes, I think. But yeah, I don't think any full-size one was ever made. There's lots of like artists' impressions and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's quite an unusual one. Now this one was actually released in different style packaging to the other one. So it was like almost it was released as like a sort of a special version or something like that. So this one does actually have a couple of bombs underneath. I'm assuming the real one is similar to the F-117 where it has like an internal weapons bay, but Ertl have obviously decided to give this one a couple of bombs. So that's the last one I thought I'd do in this video. So in part 2, which I'll obviously put out shortly, I'll cover the rest of the range. So the range itself, I think, seems to have been available. I think the last models that I'm aware of were released in 1994, but the range does seem to have been available sort of into the 90s. Around about 89, 90, they brought out a different style of box, which is this here. So again, it's kind of like nice sort of sturdy cardboard. You can see again with this one, you've got the sprue on the inside. And then they tended to show in the later ones some of the other aircraft available in the range. See, there's the Blue Angels horn, and that's what I'm kind of desperately after. And then obviously, they've just done these like line drawings for what upcoming ones in the range that obviously hadn't been sort of completely released yet, or maybe the production model wasn't ready or anything like that. And again, you've got obviously details about the actual plane, sort of a couple of sort of top profile and the side profile there. So that's what the later ones were released in. But as I say, I'll cover the rest of the range in my next video. So in the meantime, please do like, share, subscribe and comment, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.